In the beginning of Parshat Vayechi, we have that Yaakov Avinu lived 17 years in Eretz Yisrael, and the time approached for Israel to die, so he called his son for Yosef and said to him, "Please, if I have found favor in your eyes, please place your hand under my thigh and do kindness and truth with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt. For I will lie down with my fathers, and you shall transport me out of Egypt and bury me in their tomb." He said, "I personally will do as you have said." He replied, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Yisrael prostrated himself towards the head of the bed. This is the opening scene of Parshat Vayechi, where Yaakov Avinu, knowing he's coming close to death, asks that he be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And more particularly, he says, make sure, please, do not bury me in Egypt. The focus is not being buried in Egypt. Then he explains, the parsha goes on, how Rachel Imeinu was buried on the way, was not buried in Maris Machpelah. Al Pi Dibur, this is what Hashem wanted, for her to daven for the, as Chazal explained, for her to daven for the Jews as they were going into exile. And the parsha then deals with the final brachos that Yaakov Avinu gives to the entire family before he passes away. The burial of Yaakov Avinu indeed in Eretz Yisrael as he was promised. And the parsha ends with the relationship between Yosef and his brothers, and ultimately the death of Yosef at the end of the parsha. Why doesn't Yaakov Avinu want to be buried in Egypt? So Rashi tells us, and this is in source number 2, 3 reasons. He knew that the soil of Egypt would one day be plagued with lice, which would have swarmed beneath his body if he'd been buried in Egypt. 2, those who are buried outside of Eretz Yisrael will not come to life at the time of resurrection until they roll through the earth to Eretz Yisrael. And 3, Yaakov Avinu did not want the Egyptians to make his tomb a shrine of idol worship. Just to understand Rashi a little bit more in depth before we get to our specific questions, the Talei Oros points out that would not Yaakov Avinu be buried in Eretz Goshen and the plagues not affect him, so why was he worried about lice? So he brings down from the Rambam in his Perush on the Mishnah Pirkei Avos that lice was the exception. Although it didn't affect the Jews, it did affect the land of Goshen, and thereby Yaakov Avinu, who had prophecy, understood this, did not want to be buried there. As well as we understand, this is the difference between chesed and emet. On the chesed aspect, please preserve my body. It shouldn't be affected by the lice. It shouldn't be affected by rolling in the ground. And on the emes level, chesed ve'emes, on the emes level, level of truth, make sure that my body is not made into a god, because this is something that's so un-Jewish. There's only one God. And indeed, as the Shirei Chumash points out in source 3, this was not something he was worried about in his own family. Jews understand no matter how great a person is, they're human. But Goyim sometimes will, make these tremendous sculptures and models of these people and deify them. And that is what concerned him. So for these 3 reasons, as Chazal Rashi brings down, Yaakov Avinu did not want to be buried in Egypt. I want to take a look at our pasuk, at the pasuk which says in 29, he says, "Please, if I found favor in your eyes, please place your hand under my thigh and do kindness and truth with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt." And I'd like to try to analyze, with God's help, this pasuk, raising 3 questions. The first 2 we will answer very briefly, and the third one is the one that Amir Hashem I'd like to struggle with a little bit more to try to gain some depth, and obviously the lessons that are applicable for our lives. The first question, which is the question of the Shemin Hatov brings down from the Satmar Rebbe. Why did Yaakov Avinu have to go through all of this? If Yaakov Avinu felt by Kravu Yemei Yisrael Lamut that he was about to die, why didn't he just pick himself up, go to Hebron, die there, be buried there, and then solve all the problems? You don't have to worry about where you're going to be buried. You don't have to worry about being transported. Just die in Hebron, be buried in Hebron. Why was it necessary? Why was it that Yaakov Avinu remained in Egypt when he knew that his days were being numbered? Right? We know people who, toward the end of their life, want to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. They moved to Eretz Yisrael. Why didn't Yaakov Avinu do that? Question 1. Question number 2, 4b. Rav Leibowitz was the Rosh Yeshiva of Chavetz Chaim asked the following, quoting the Ramban: why did Yaakov insist that Yosef swear? Right, swearing is something very, very intense. Yosef, his favorite son, already promised to fulfill his father's last request. Furthermore, when Yaakov asked Yosef many years before to go see how the brothers were, and that was definitely a dangerous mission, Yosef acquiesced right away. Why was it necessary that Yaakov felt that it required an oath to make sure that he would do it? And he says, I'll personally do as you have said. And Yaakov says, no, swear to me. Your word isn't enough. He insists on taking an oath. What is the importance of this oath? And third question, which is the question I'd like to focus in on, Talei Chaim as well as others ask the following: Madua bikesh Yaakov Avinu lekaber b'Eretz Yisrael v'lo